Welcome to another episode of the Cassels Cast. My name's Eamon Cassels. Joining me today is going to be Kenny Kluska, and we're going to be going over 8 of the most disappointing teams in the NBA on a panic meter scale of 1 to 10. Should be a fun episode, so let's just get into it. All right, joining the show now is Kenny Kluska. Together, we're going to be talking about some of the more disappointing teams around the league, and we're going to assess where we're at on a panic meter. But first things first, how you doing today, Kenny?
I'm doing good. Happy New Year 2026. We've had a lot of exciting basketball, almost halfway through the regular season. As these playoff races heat up, I'm sure we got a lot of excitement remaining. We have some disappointing teams that can definitely still have a long time to rebound, get closer to preseason expectations. We have the trade deadline a little more than a month away, so a lot can still happen, and I'm definitely tuned in to see what goes on.
Yes, sir. Yeah, happy New Year, man. Happy New Year to all the listeners as well. Should be an exciting rest of the year of basketball. And yeah, like you said, I mean, I feel like this is a good time of the year because we have a pretty significant sample size, but still a lot can change, and we're still a month away from the trade deadline, things like that. So I think this is the perfect time to sort of assess some of the teams that have been a little bit underwhelming. We're going to start over in the West. We have 4 teams from each conference. First things first, starting with the Lakers. This is kind of an interesting one because they are still the 5th seed. They still have a pretty good record overall of 20-11. But since LeBron has returned, they really haven't been good at all. They have the 24th ranked defense, according to Cleaning the Glass, and then a significantly negative net rating with LeBron, Reeves, and Luka. So, sort of, where are you at with this Lakers team?
I mean, if I had to put 1 to 10, panic meter, I'm gonna give it, because the record's good, not as high as maybe if they were 3 games worse, but I'm still giving it a 6. Yes, they are the 5th seed, 20-11. I mean, I'm not sure their preseason over under, but I'm sure they're on pace to break that. But there's definitely some worrisome things surrounding them. We've heard JJ Redick go after the refs a few times after some recent losses. You could see the frustrations mounting for him. And, I always find it interesting because we always see the Lakers amongst the leaders in free throw rate compared to their opponent. So, that's an interesting take from Redick. But what's crazy, 20-11, and they're getting outscored on the season. Like that doesn't make sense. I mean, you figure NFL, that would be like an 11-6 team being outscored on the season. And, that's pretty ridiculous to think about. And that's with the Lakers winning by 24 against the Kings recently. I mean, that's, nothing to pat your back over doing that. But yes, the defense is a train wreck. Reggie Miller was calling out Luka Doncic the other day. That really gave me a chuckle. Not like Reggie was known for his defense, but I mean, at least he gave some effort on that end. And I know it's crazy to say, and this isn't me saying that Nico Harrison made the right decision, but you could almost see what he was thinking. I mean, it was still dumb not to try to involve other teams to get a better deal, to make Anthony Davis the top piece you get back when he's how much older? 7 years older, and as injury plagued as they come. But you could see why there was concern, and the body change with Luka. Okay, maybe that'll allow him to give more effort on that defensive end where he won't just put all his focus on the offense. That really hasn't been the case. He's shooting 10 plus threes per game, second most in the league, only behind Curry, which is understandable, except Doncic is shooting them like 32%. That's just, he's I've never seen him quite in the light of a Joker, an SGA, Greek freak, because, and I get that Luka's a guard, although SGA is too, but, the efficiency is just not there. His usage rate is extremely high. So, yes, he puts up insane numbers, but that's part of the reason why. And I know Dallas did make the finals with him once, but he was exposed on the defensive end in that final. So, LeBron has rebounded a bit from a slow start when he did finally come back from sciatica, but he clearly isn't giving it his all on the defensive end. He's a shell of himself on that end than he was in the past. Reeves being hurt hurts because who is that third option now? I mean, Hachimura has been out, but even with him in the lineup, is he a reliable third option? Not really. Ayton got off to a really good start, been okay of late, but yeah, after the top two, they don't have someone they could go to. Kind of reminiscent of last year when Redick played the whole same five for an entire half. Uh, he's not doing that now, but it's just, finding other guys outside LeBron and Luka who can create offense and, finding those defensive pieces. Marcus Smart, of course, a former defensive player of the year. Some might question whether he deserved it. Still a plus on that end, but, he's never going to be in the running for that award again. And, there's just too many holes on the defense for him to cover up all of them. So, my rating maybe not as high because they're off to a 20-11 start, but I think you're kidding yourself if you have them on a short list of title contenders.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a very interesting situation with the Lakers. Yeah, overall, I'm not totally panicking. I would say I'm at like a five. I also sort of take like the big picture of these teams into account. So when we talk about like other teams like the Warriors, Clippers, that's definitely a factor for me there. But yeah, with the Lakers, I think overall they're still in a decent spot because they have Luka and he's still relatively young. But yeah, like you said, this team is in no position to truly compete for a title, mainly because of the defense. And honestly, I don't think there's like a move at the deadline that would totally change that. Could the defense get a little bit better? Absolutely. I know they've been linked to a guy like Herb Jones or Andrew Wiggins. I think those are two solid targets for them. At the same time, I don't think that moves them into title contention by any means. But I think it would move them into maybe like the 18th ranked defense instead of the 24th. But yeah, it's really interesting and sort of to your point. If this team wins, it's typically like in close games, they might have like a blowout against like Sacramento or like New Orleans, whatever. But they're 10-0 in clutch time games, which is really mind boggling. But when they lose, it's really, really ugly. I mean, we saw it on Christmas Day against the Rockets. And then shortly after that, we saw it again against the Pistons on another nationally televised game. And it's just like these teams that have athleticism, they have speed. It really bothers them. And big picture, this core of Luka, LeBron, and Reeves is just not a good fit, and I don't think it's something they can continue with in the future. Obviously, with LeBron being 41 right now, it's not that big of a concern because he's probably on his last couple of years. Who knows? Maybe he comes back to the Lakers next year. Maybe he goes somewhere else. Maybe he even retires at this point. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think they're still in a decent spot, big picture wise, just because they have Luka. I could see this team, unlike a couple other teams in the West that have been disappointing, making it out of the first round, but I think their ceiling is sort of like winning one playoff series. Where are you at in terms of like this team's ceiling and then the combination of those core three guys?
Their ceiling, I personally don't know if they could win a playoff round. I get Denver's four starters out right now, but that could definitely, change come playoff time. Gordon Brown should be back shortly. But, Nuggets, Thunder, and Rockets almost are certainties to me to be a team to advance past the first round. That would leave one team remaining. And the Spurs, you just hope Wemby makes it to the playoffs. Guys that size always concern me with health. We saw a slight injury scare yesterday, but he was able to walk off on his own. So, but yeah, that always concerns me. We both write for the Timberwolves. Don't know if I could consider them a top four team that has the opportunity. So really, Lakers, Spurs, and T-Wolves I would have as those three teams that could be the fourth team to advance in the first round. And I guess it depends on the first round matchups between those teams. Obviously, the season isn't even halfway over. A lot can change with playoff seeding. So I'm not going to say, all right now it's 4-5 Rockets, like Lakers, because obviously that could change, although I think the Rockets would win that in probably 5 games. But yeah, if the Lakers were to match up with the Timberwolves in the opening round, and I know the Lakers lost in 5 games last year, I think that would be an interesting series. And again, a lot still to change. I think the Timberwolves are sure going to make a move at the trade deadline, whether it's a blockbuster, probably not, but something to at least improve the bench, improve their point guard rotation. And as you mentioned, it's just hard seeing that move for the Lakers. A guy like Herb Jones kind of having a disappointing year for New Orleans. Supposed to be that 3 and D guy. That 3 part hasn't been happening for them. So, maybe they pull a rabbit out of the hat, make a move that definitely raises their ceiling. But right now, if I had to predict over under playoff series wins half, I would go the under.
Yeah, no, I think that totally makes sense. And at least for me, this is sort of where I envision them. Maybe record wise, they're even a little bit better, but like eye test wise, it's a little bit worse. So yeah, overall, not a massive concern. I just thought it was sort of worth bringing up the Lakers based off those two like embarrassing nationally televised games and the fact that they haven't been that good with LeBron. And frankly, in the whole month of December, they were pretty bad. I think we can move ahead though to the Warriors, who are kind of always in a similar position to Lakers because Steph Curry, LeBron James, are always sort of going to be linked together. But yeah, Warriors right now are 18 and 16. They're the eighth seed in the West. And then in terms of offensive defensive rating, fifth defensive rating and 19th offensive rating, which is like a big shocker to me at least. But yeah, where are you at with this Warriors team? And do you see potentially a move at the deadline that could change things for them? Or do you think they're like stuck with this core more or less?
I'm going to give it a 6.5 for my panic meter. Obviously, the elephant in the room is that guy who's eligible to be traded on January 15th, that being Jonathan Kuminga, who's not even in the rotation right now. Probably a 95% chance he gets dealt. What is his value around the league? I mean, as at his ceiling, he probably is a 20 point per game scorer. I mean, we saw it once Curry went out in the series against the Timberwolves. He was dropping 20 plus nightly, but just never has been on the same page with Steve Kerr. So I don't know what his value is around the league. What was the deal that was rumored? Malik Monk and a first rounder, was it, in the offseason? Malik Monk has kind of regressed this year as well. Would they be able to do better than that? I personally don't think so, but maybe they could get a important player that could at least be part of their rotation. And I'm always of the belief that it's hard for an older team to win, and we're going to be talking about another older team later. But yeah, I just let's look at the recent champions. I mean, not every team's going to be as young as the Thunder, obviously, but other than Caruso, who was over 30 in their rotation, nobody. The Boston Celtics, yes, they had Al Horford, but Drew Holiday too, okay, but their main pieces, Tatum, Brown, White, all in their mid to late 20s at the time. The Nuggets, Jeff Green was playing 15 minutes a game, but other than that, a lot of younger guys. Jokic was 27, 28, I think, at the time. Uh, KCP maybe 30. But yeah, you can't. I just don't think you could rely on a team that is 30 plus throughout, and that's a lot of the Warriors roster. I mean, of course, Kerry, you're not going to worry about it too much. Butler's is still a very productive player, but Draymond Green really regressing on the offensive end. I think that's part of the reason why their offensive rating isn't so stellar. They still play him quite a bit. Gene this year, 2 point or 3 point shooter. So I think that is a large reason why their offensive rating isn't great. They brought in Horford, another older guy. Yes, a huge part of the Celtics championship team. That was 2 years ago. He's 39 now. Not looking too great, but he healed another 30 plus guy. So, and they're getting unexpected performances from Spencer, Richard, guys like that. But I don't know if they're going to be able to keep it up all year. And again, just another team that I heard the preseason expectations of them possibly being a title contender, especially with their record after they acquired Butler. I just didn't see it. I've never been a fan of these teams trying to go way too veteran laden. There's nothing wrong with having one or two guys, but when it's numerous throughout the rotation, I think it's an issue. And yeah, maybe they could be a top 6 team. Right now, they're 3 games behind the Timberwolves. I don't think they're going to. They'll be a playing team. I do think they will get through the playing tournament, but the reward might be OKC or Denver or Houston in the first round, and I don't see them winning any of those series. So, yeah, we'll see what they could get back for Kuminga. I'm not too optimistic that it's going to be a complete game changer, though, especially how much value is he having getting DMP coaches' decisions at this point?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I'm gonna go a little bit higher on the panic meter. I have them at like an 8 right now. Honestly, heading into the season, I thought they would be a playing team, so maybe I shouldn't be this high on the panic meter. But the way it's happened has been a little bit surprising. I thought they would be better than like 2 games over 500. I had them as that playing team more so as a testament to the Western Conference than a knock on them. But yeah, I think you really nailed it with the point that you can't have damn near your entire rotation be over the age of 35 or in their 30s, whatever the case may be. I think that's a real problem for this team. And the bigger picture with the Warriors here is I really feel like they pulled sort of a rabbit out of their hats with the Jimmy Butler trade, and I just don't think there's anything left there, especially with sort of the rumors about how they're going to approach the deadline. They have been linked to a ton of players, but they also don't want to give up Butler or Draymond Green. And given that, I don't think there's a move for them, quite frankly, because I don't, like you said, I don't think Kuminga has any value at all, unless you attach several first round picks. Most of them would be in the future, and that's something the Warriors have proven that they're super hesitant to do, which is understandable. But given that, I don't think there's a trade for them. A couple guys I would like to see them maybe pursue if they were willing to part ways with some of that future draft capital, maybe a Trey Murphy or Michael Porter Jr., upgrade that Kuminga spot a little bit. At the same time, with the way they've approached most trade deadlines and what we know about this front office, I just don't see that as a realistic possibility. And then we get into the Draymond Green and Jimmy Butler piece of it all. If I were them, I would especially look to move off Draymond Green. Easier said than done. He won 4 championships with them, but at this point, I think he's going to have just some value. I might even package him with like Kuminga and picks. Maybe go after Domantas Sabonis just to try to change things up. I always thought he would be an interesting fit in the system. The defense is obviously a concern, but at the same time, they've pretty much shot down any opportunity to move off of Draymond. And even with his antics, sort of reaching another level again and his play declining, I don't see them doing that. So with that in mind, I feel like they're kind of stuck with this roster as is mostly, and yeah, that's unfortunate. And the real bummer is that Curry's still playing at an elite level. I think he's a top 5 level guy in the league still, which is kind of insane given his age. But this is just it feels like this is sort of the end of the road for this team, and this is really how the last few years of Curry's career is going to play out. And honestly, outside of that magical run in 2022, this has been the story of the Warriors in the post KD era. Curry's still amazing, but they just don't have the supporting cast around him. And even with Butler, that's unfortunately the case. Part of that's the West being insane. Part of that is that Butler isn't totally the same player he was a few years ago. And they still don't have enough creation outside of those two guys. So yeah, I think this is a really tough situation overall for the Warriors, and I don't see it getting much better. I think they're destined to sort of be a play-in team. I agree they'll make it out of the play-in, but in all likelihood, they'll lose in that first round.
Yeah, 100%. And you wonder if Steve Kerr's losing his voice a little bit in that locker room. I get it, numerous championships, but of course, sometimes is run, and that might be the case with Kerr and Golden State. I mean, we saw Draymond just walk off the court at one time, getting in the argument with Kerr. So yeah, I just think their title window is closed. Um, some changes are gonna have to be made in the next few years, but yeah, it's still fun watching Curry at least. So the Warriors fans at least still got that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The Draymond Kerr stuff is just bizarre, and I agree. I have to wonder if there's something a little more going on there, and if he's maybe losing his voice. It's rare for a coach to remain that head coach for so long, so I think that could be part of it. But yeah, I mean, at the very least, this team is incredibly interesting and still super entertaining to watch. They're always one of my most watched teams, and in large part due to Curry, but it's just always such an interesting situation to monitor because they're decent, but they're not that good, and they're always in close games. So yeah, at the very least, this is an interesting team. I think we can move on to a team that, frankly, I found a little less interested this season, and that would be the Los Angeles Clippers. Probably, by all accounts, the most disappointing team in the league. Right now, they're sitting at 13th in the West with an 11-21 record. Now they are quietly on a 5 game win streak, and they're just 2 games outside of the play-in tournament. So the panic I feel like is decreasing a little bit, but still obviously an immensely disappointing start for a team that had clear playoff aspirations, and I think most people, including myself, booked them into that sort of top 6 range. So yeah, where are you at with the Clippers, and do you think there's any chance they can sort of salvage this horrible start and get into the playoffs?
I mean, I have them at a 7.5, their panic meter, and the 5 game winning streak has been fun. I think 4 of the games have come without Zubac. Brook Lopez had that incredible 3-point shooting night recently, and Kawhi Leonard is playing arguably as good as he's ever played in that 5 game span. So it has been fun to watch, but of course they dug himself in such a huge hole. And I hinted that there was another team, 30 plus guys, that I didn't necessarily believe in as much as the consensus did. Harden, Leonard, Chris Dunn, Brook Lopez, Nicholas Batum, Bradley Beal, all these guys over 30, Bogdanovich. I'm probably forgetting someone, but yeah, there you go. All those guys over 30. What was crazy is that, I mean, Bradley Beal's actually younger than Norman Powell. You wouldn't think it because Norman Powell seemed to be ascending, his best season of his career last year, and Bradley Beal clearly on the decline. So, that move to, subsequent moves, obviously they got John Collins for Powell, but, replacing Powell with Beal, I just didn't think that would necessarily be a move to help the Clippers. Collins has been a bit disappointing for the Clippers. And yeah, there's just so much going wrong with the team. Of course, it started in the offseason with the whole Kawhi Leonard drama. And I just, you wonder, I feel like a guy like Steve Ballmer, maybe a tad overrated by the media and whatnot because, he's willing to spend money, but, makes a lot of moves that don't pan out. Obviously, the SGA one comes to mind. And of course, the Clippers are likely giving up their first round pick to the Thunder, which is crazy. Imagine if the Clippers win the draft lottery and the first overall pick goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder. That would be absolutely insane. But yeah, 3 games out of the play-in, but they're 9 games out of a top 6 seed. So, they're pretty much done with the opportunity to get that. So, yeah, yes, they've been playing much better of late, but a 5 game win streak when you're 6-21. I mean, the Pelicans went on a 4 game winning streak recently, and they're still far out of it. Definitely a disappointing year. Again, I was less optimistic on their chances to be a title contender than most people, but I did still expect, let's say between a 45 and 50 win season, and there's no way they're going to approach that. So yeah, 7.5 sounds good to me.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm more or less the same. I marked down an 8 for this team. Honestly, if we had done this a couple of weeks ago, I probably would have said a 10 or 11.
Yeah.
I probably would have broke the panic meter there because it was looking like a true disaster. But I mean, this 5 game win streak is really huge, especially the way Kawhi's playing right now, and the fact that the West really isn't as deep as we thought. I think is another big factor here that could help them. I could see them getting into the play-in. I don't know if I would bet on it. I certainly wouldn't bet on them to make the playoffs. But even the result of them getting into the play-in is a failure for this season with the high expectations they had. And honestly, I don't know how sustainable this recent success is. They have beat some good teams, including the Pistons, Rockets, Lakers. Some nice wins there, and it's impressive that they're doing it without Zubac. But at the same time, I feel like Kawhi is it. You hate to say it, but he's one of the more injury-prone players in the league, and I just have to wonder when the next time he's going to miss a few games is. Unfortunately, and even with Kawhi and Harden, I just don't view this team as like a serious threat in any way. So yeah, eventually I feel like things are gonna sort of come back to earth where they were in the first 20 or so games of the season. But yeah, maybe they can make a play-in push. But yeah, like I said, it would be an immense disappointment still, given the expectations and aspirations that they had heading into the season. I had them as like a fifth seed. I bought into them, and then 10 games into the season, I was like, "You're a complete idiot." Why did? Because I feel like for the past 3 years, I was legit a Clippers hater. I was like, "Nah, this is," and they kept proving me wrong. I was like, "Okay, now I can't do it anymore." And then yeah, the start of the season, I was like, "Damn!" The 1 year I bet on them, they have the season I've been thinking for the last 3 years. But yeah, it's a really rough situation though, especially like you said, without their draft capital, and the fact that they're probably gonna surrender a lottery pick to the Thunder. And I think the one like silver lining I would say is that they have a ton of cap space in 2027, and they're not the Lakers, but they still play in LA, and they have proven that they can get some pretty big name free agents. So maybe that's the big picture, the silver lining. But this core is currently constructed is very, very, very far away from title contention.
Yeah, pretty much a complete mess. Gonna have to get a decent amount younger, and when you don't have your first round pick, that's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The trade deadline stuff will be interesting to monitor. At the same time, I'm probably not expecting a lot because they could look to get a little younger, maybe, but that will probably make them worse. So, yeah, it's a really rough situation. Another team who's in a really rough situation, especially as we approach the trade deadline, is the Dallas Mavericks. Obviously, after trading Luca, this franchise really moved into a different direction. And then they luck into getting Cooper Flag and stuff. But at the same time, I think most people expected them to be decently competitive, and they have not been. They're the 12th seed with a 12-22 overall record. Now, sort of similar to the Clippers, they're 2 games away from that play-in tournament, so maybe they can make something and go on a run. But Anthony Davis, the injury problems just keep piling up. So yeah, overall, where are you with this Mavs team, and do you see them moving off AD at the deadline?
Actually, have them the lowest of the four teams in the West. I'm going to give them a 5, and I think a lot of that is, yes, the record is subpar at 12-22, but the after Cooper Flag, the point guard experiment clearly didn't work out. He's been really playing phenomenal. You know, right now, the clear rookie of the year to me, I know Canepo has been awesome, came back last night, but, right now I think Flag has overtaken that. And, that really helps Mavericks fans to know that, they'll have him for a few years, well, more than a few years. The future of their franchise and, the fact that they fired Nico Harrison. You don't have to hear those chants anymore. What was it? The one game, PJ Washington had a free throw to try to tie the game, and they're chanting "Fire Harrison" during that. I mean, that couldn't be easy for the Mavericks players. So at least to get that headache out of the way, they've been playing a little better. Of course, Anthony Davis being out of the lineup so much, they're never going to reach their full height. It's definitely concerning that Derek Lively can't find a way to stay healthy these past couple years. A guy who looked like quite the draft steal, helping guide him to the finals his rookie year. It's looking less like a steal if he's not able to stay on the court. And that Quentin Grimes trade was terrible. Martin barely plays for them. We'll see when Kyrie Irving returns. If he does, I'm pretty sure he's going to return. There really hasn't been too many updates, at least that I've heard. Getting average point guard play of late from Nemhard and Williams. Of course, D'Angelo Russell was a complete bust of a signing. But yeah, my panic meter isn't too high because my expectations weren't too high. The main thing Mavericks fans want to see is Cooper Flag really look like the future, which he has been of late. We'll see if they do trade Anthony Davis. A lot of rumors of him to the Hawks. I could see the Hawks making a move like that, kind of a desperation move because you can't rely on him to stay healthy. Of course, their other big man, Kristaps Porzingis, the illness has kept him out so many games. So, I guess the hope would be to have either Porzingis or Davis on the floor every game. But yeah, expectations weren't too high. Just too many teams in the West that I thought would be better than them this year. So, I'll give them a 5.
Yeah, I think that's totally valid. I mean, my expectations weren't sky high. I think a lot of people penciled them into the playoffs, and I was kind of like, I thought there'd be a playing team, but outside of the playoffs, I always thought like the whole playoffs thing was a bit ambitious, especially when you're banking on Davis. That's obviously a huge risk. I think I'm a little bit higher. I got them at a 7. I think where my concern comes in is they are overall. I'll start off positively in a good position because they have Cooper Flag. That puts them in at least a solid position, and they're going to have likely another lottery pick in this draft. Maybe it won't be super high because maybe they make a play and push or whatever, but I think in all likelihood they're going to have another lottery pick and a loaded draft class. So I think that sets them up nicely. My concern is that they don't have their pick for the next 5 or so years off the top of my head. And it looks like they're probably gonna trade Anthony Davis, which honestly, despite like his downside, I just don't love for a team that just doesn't have their pick. And I don't like the return they're gonna get. I think it's gonna be pretty limited. I mean, the Hawks package that's been sort of floating around is Porzingis, Luke Kennard, and Zachary Rizichet. That's cool. He's a first overall pick in 2024, but quite frankly, he hasn't looked good this year. And I always thought his ceiling was really limited. And then Porzingis and Kennard are two expiring contracts. Yeah, that's nice to have some cap flexibility, but what are you going to do with that? Probably nothing at the end of the day. So I think that's where my sort of concern is. I might just keep Davis at this point, especially with how limited his value is. But I definitely understand the logic of moving off of him, especially because his contract is horrible. But for a team that is sort of going into this youth movement with Cooper Flag, it really hurts that they don't have their picks, and they've just been really as bad as I could have imagined. I mean, I thought they wouldn't be very good, but I didn't think they would be this bad at the same time, and the offense has just been bad beyond comprehension. So I think that's really my concern, and injuries certainly play a factor, but I just don't see big picture how they're going to really be able to set Flag up for like the most success possible, if that makes sense. Maybe. This floated into my brain. LeBron has that flare option, I believe. Maybe this is a landing spot. That's one of the few teams I could sort of see him signing with, but at the same time, I don't know how much that changes things for this team. So yeah, overall, I think despite having Flag and likely another pick, this team is just really in a rough spot.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get your concern with the lack of draft capital in future years because you do want to get other young pieces around Flag, especially again if Lively can't stay in the lineup. You know, Nemhard, Williams, point guard play has been, it's been nice to see, especially Nemhard, an undrafted guy, but neither of those guys are the future starting point guard. Kyrie, we'll see how he is returning from injury. But yeah, they got a long way to go to once again become a NBA Finals team like they were just 2 short years ago.
Yeah, most definitely. I think we can move ahead to the Eastern Conference, and honestly, there's no better place to start than the Cleveland Cavaliers. Because maybe you say the Clippers, but either way, this has been one of the two most disappointing teams in the league. 19 and 16, currently the eighth seed. Most people expected them to be a top two seed. A lot of people had them as the number one seed. At the same time, they're only 3.5 games back from the top three in a really weakened Eastern Conference. So yeah, overall, where are you at with the Cavs?
I'm going to give it a 7, and part of it is because of the Eastern Conference. There not being too many surefire contenders, but I would actually have them as the biggest disappointment again because my optimism surrounding the Clippers wasn't as high as everyone else. While I wasn't a firm believer in the Cavaliers doing damage in the playoffs, as we've seen the past couple years, I thought they would be a regular season juggernaut might not be the word, but sure. I mean, maybe a 60-win season, kind of like last year, and that hasn't been the case. I know they haven't had Max Strus all season, but I don't think he raises the ceiling that much. I think a guy like Tyson might be better than him at this point, and I think a move that they might have to think about making is moving Jared Allen. Obviously, I'm a Knicks fan. I've just seen Mitchell Robinson eat his breakfast, lunch, and dinner, whether it's in the playoffs or that Christmas game. Since that All Star season, he's just he's a solid center. Don't get me wrong, but I think maybe moving on from him and putting Tyson in the starting lineup could be a move for them. I don't know what they would get back for Allen, whether it's a player in the rotation, but well, probably a player in the rotation. But Hunter's been a bit of a disappointment this year for the Cavaliers, losing Ty Jerome, who I know hasn't even made a season debut with Memphis, but having that spark off the bench isn't there. And again, with Hunter not playing well, they don't necessarily have that this year. Darius Garland, of course, hasn't looked all that special. So, yeah, a lot of issues with the Cavaliers for sure. But, it just reminds me of last year thinking of the Pacers, who at this point might have had a worse record than the Cavaliers. Was definitely similar at least, and they found their way into the final. So again, still more than half of a regular season remaining. So a lot can change, but I do think people appointed Evan Mobley a little bit too quickly. These preseason lists, top 100 players, a lot of them had Mobley in the top 10 or just outside the top 10. I thought that was a little too ambitious for him. I get that he's a top defensive player in the league, but I don't think his offensive game is quite there yet. He's definitely improved there, much more reliable 3-point shooter and whatnot. But, he's not a guy, and I get they have that guy in Mitchell, but I'm not Allen. Mobley's not that guy who I can believe can help will a team to victory at the end of the game, down 4-3 or whatever. So I do think he was crowned too early to be, the next superstar. But yeah, again, with the East being the way it is, am I a believer in Detroit? I'm not sure. They've played way more games under 500 teams than really most of the Eastern Conference has. Um, Knicks, of course, look like one of the best. Celtics, we'll see if Tatum comes back. Magic, we'll talk about them later. 76ers, I don't see doing much. So, yeah, I mean, there's still a pathway to the Cavaliers somehow finding a way to the NBA Finals, but that just looks less likely than prior to the season beginning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you nailed it. I'm gonna go with six, same sort of range. I do think there has to be some level of concern with how they've started. I didn't envision a world where they would be in the play-in right now, but I think there's also, especially given the teams we talked about, I know it's the West, so it's a little bit different, but there's a clear pathway for this team to turn things around, and injuries have certainly played a part, but frankly, they've played a part for a lot of teams, so I don't think it's like that valid of an excuse. But yeah, I mean, I really agree with your point about shaking up this core, specifically with trading Jared Allen. I do think if this team turns things around, I think part of it would be a trade deadline move, and ultimately, if they have any sort of ceiling in the playoffs, maybe they're able to get to a top three seed or whatever, and they keep the core together. But if they have any real ceiling in the playoffs, I think we've seen enough to prove that this core four just doesn't really work together. And Allen would be the odd man out. Unfortunately, I know some people might want to trade Garland. There were some rumors about that. At the same time, I get the small backcourt, but sort of like you were saying about Mobley, I don't think he's dependable enough to be that like clear cut number two option guy, especially because they don't have a ton of other creation. So I think you sort of need to keep Garland there, and I think he helps Mitchell a lot. He's been playing a lot better as of late. And then Jared Allen, he just doesn't play in the clutch. So I don't understand this idea of a quote unquote core four where one of these four guys doesn't play in the clutch. I get why he doesn't play in the clutch. And I never really loved the fit between Mobley and Allen just because, well, Mobley has improved in this regard. There's still two inconsistent shooting bigs and Allen doesn't shoot at all. So I always think that's tricky to build around. I do get the idea of like having good defense around two really small guards, but at the same time, it's just clearly run its course and see what you can get for Allen. I think he would be valuable to a lot of teams. There's a lot of teams around the league who need a center, so I think it's just time to move on, see what you can get for him, and then reshuffle the deck. And I could definitely see them moving up. And in fact, I anticipate it kind of. I would be shocked if they're a playing team by the end of the year. I don't know how high, but I think ultimately they're going to get one of those top six seeds and probably even a top 4 or 5 seed. So ultimately, I'm not overly concerned, but there does have to be some level of concern given how poorly they started, and I think there's going to be some level of changes as well.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say they'd surpass Toronto. They'd surpass Philly, who are both ahead of them at the moment, although Philly, four less games. Cleveland has two more wins, two more losses, so actually the same amount of games back. So, I definitely anticipate them passing those two teams, maybe Orlando, who's just a half game above them. So easily a top four seed is still in the picture. And, you'll at least get that home court in the first round. And, once you get past the first round, you never know.
Yeah, no, absolutely, especially in the East. Brought up Orlando a couple times. I think that's a perfect transition to them. 19 and 15. I feel like the big story with this team, honestly, has been the Paulo and Franz combination just not working at all. There has been injuries to both of them, so we haven't totally seen it, but the evidence is sort of overwhelming at this point. So yeah, where are you with this team, and do you think they could potentially make a move, or do you think they're just going to ride it out with this new core, especially since they made that big trade for Bane in the offseason?
I mean, their goal this offseason seemed to be to become a better 3-point shooting team, and that's been far from the case. Desmond Bane has improved after a slow start, but he's under 35%. Tyus Jones has been almost a complete negative on the court for the Magic. He's shooting below average, and again, they're one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the league, which was supposed to be a goal of theirs to improve at. So yeah, I have them at a 6.5. My concern is, maybe Paolo Banchero just isn't that guy that so many anticipated him to be. You would really expect him to be picking up his game with Franz currently out. And there's so many games where he honestly looks like the third best player on the Magic behind Bang and behind even Anthony Black some games. And now Jalen Suggs just came back. So that might be another guy that sometimes looks better than Banchero at this time. I mean, I always had slight skepticism with him because he's just not the most efficient offensive player, especially at the forward position. He's been terrible from 3-point range this year. So, he's still relatively young in his fourth year, 23 years old. So, the hope is still there. But I was definitely on the fence before the season. Is Wagner or Banchero the best player on the team? I think to me, no question, it's Wagner at this point. Maybe if they could stay healthy, they still seem to have one of the 3 or 4 best rosters in the Eastern Conference. I've seen the Knicks struggle with them. They lost the first 2 times, did win the next 2, but uh, I just expected more from this team. Wendell Carter Jr., solid backup center in my eyes. I don't know about him as a full-time starting center. So, maybe that's a spot they look to upgrade at. But yeah, just the lack of 3-point shooting is a major concern. Maybe Bane gets closer to that 40% guy he's been throughout his career. Maybe they give Jace Richardson more playing time. I feel like they've started to slowly get more into that. Part of that is probably because Suggs, Wagner are out. That's two, big rotation guys who play huge minutes. But yeah, maybe he should be overtaking Tyus Jones in the rotation. So yeah, Jonathan Isaac, I just at this point, yes, he's staying healthier than he has, but that all defensive guy that he was anticipated to be just doesn't look like the case anymore. So yeah, I'll give it a, what did I say, 6.5. Again, some of these are, if these teams are in the Western Conference, it would probably be higher. But, since they're in the East, I'll give it a 6.5. And again, they're right there to be a potential top 3 team in the East. So, we'll see what goes on. But yeah, just the lack of 3-point shooting has been a major disappointment and, something they really wanted to improve at this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be like my most illogical rating. And honestly, like, I'll explain it, but I feel like I don't have the best reasoning behind it. I'm going to go with a 4. There's a lot of concerns with this team. And you brought up, I think, really most of the concerns. The 3-point shooting's been awful, even with getting Bane. And the two best players just can't seem to find a way to fit together when they have been healthy and on the court together. And then Paulo has really fallen off a cliff this year. He's always a guy that I've kind of defended, and I'm having a tougher time doing that this year because he's statistically the worst volume shooter in the league by a pretty significant distance. I can't quit the idea of this team, and on paper, this roster is like Yeah, they don't have the shooting totally, but like other than that, it's like kind of perfect. There's like no reason for Paulo and Franz to be this bad together. And I'm like, if I whenever Franz returns, and I'm like a good like few weeks stretch away from saying they're like the second biggest threat to come out of the East. That's a big if, and it still needs to be seen, and that's a concern. But man, what we've seen from this team in the playoffs, and they haven't won a series, so I fully understand that. But what we've seen from this team when they have played in the playoffs, even without Desmond Bain, and then last year they didn't even have Jalen Suggs, this team is a really, really brutal matchup. And they have a lot of size, their defense is still really good. And then the scoring options with Paulo and Franz, it's like hypothetically there. Desmond Bain as well. He's probably one of the better third options in the league. Hypothetically, I mean, we still need to see this all. But I just can't quit the idea of this roster, especially with how wide open the East seems to be. The Knicks are still my favorite, until proven otherwise. I think that's going to be the case. I picked them at the beginning of the year, but at the same time, man, I think the Magic have the potential at least to be the biggest threat if they can put it all together, which is a big if still. But yeah, I just can't quit the idea of this team, and they're really not that far back from being a top three seed. So at the end of the day, I wouldn't be shocked if they're a 3 or 4 seed and they at least pose a really difficult threat to some of these East teams. But the concern is definitely real and it's totally valid. And like you said, if they were in the West, this number would be a lot higher. But in the East, I don't know what it is about them. I can't quit it. This roster on paper just makes too much sense to me. And I mean, the other thing, like you said, Anthony Black has been amazing. Something I didn't totally expect, even though I've been a fan of his. I think that adds another element to this team that does raise their ceiling a little bit more. But yeah, ultimately, I don't know why I just can't fully panic on them yet.
And I do think, I haven't really heard a timetable, but I do think getting Mo Wagner back will help a lot. Not quite a stretch big, but at least can shoot a bit from outside. And yeah, just a guy who can, score double digits nightly off the bench. I think that would be a big help for them once he does return.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. A little bit of that floor spacing, like you said, and then just shorten up the center rotation. Because yeah, I agree. Wendell Carter probably isn't like a starting center on a really good team. I feel like they have like when Wagner's in the mix. That is, they have like 3 really solid centers, but nobody that you'd love to be like your starter on a
No.
championship team.
Yeah.
I think we can move ahead to the Bucks. Right now they're 14-20. They're the 11 seed. And they're 1.5 games out of that play-in. And then when you look at actually getting into the playoffs, they're 3.5 games out currently. And I mean, of course, there's the honest rumors. Ultimately, I don't think they're going to trade him at the deadline. But yeah, what do you make of this team and some of the rumors surrounding that they're actually going to go in the opposite direction and just one last effort to give Giannis a better supporting cast?
I mean, that doesn't make much sense to me because, I get why they would do it. I don't know how much of a baseball fan you are, somewhat, but I remember the Angels in a last-ditch effort to keep Shohei made all these moves instead of trading him. None of them panned out. Of course, Shohei went to the Dodgers. But yeah, that's kind of similar to what's going on here if the Bucks were to try to make additions because they're not one player away and I don't see them being able to make, let's say 2 additions to help their title chances. So yeah, I don't see him getting traded either. That might be more of an off-season thing if that's the case. But terrible loss last night to the Wizards. If they had won that game, that would have been what a 3-game winning streak, 4-game winning streak, something like that. But yeah, so huge disappointing loss there to a bottom feeder in the Wizards. But yeah, even the Lillard move, I get why they did it. I just don't know if Miles Turner was the right guy to really improve their ceiling. Miles Turner, if you watch that finals, if you watch the playoffs, he wasn't one of the main reasons why Indiana made that huge unexpected run. He's nowhere near the shot blocker he was earlier in his career, not the rim protector he was earlier in his career. Probably a slight upgrade over Brook Lopez, particularly because he's younger, but nothing substantial where they should have put themselves in some salary cap trouble by waiving and stretching Lillard. So yeah, I don't see how they can make enough improvements to really get in that playoff picture. Giannis, I do think it's inevitable he gets dealt again in the off season, not at the trade deadline. And yeah, 14 and 20, and that's with Ryan Rollins playing better than anyone in the world expected. Kevin Porter's looked good since he's returned. Um, yeah, I just don't see a move that all of a sudden shoots them up the standings. So yeah, I'd give it a 7. Um, you know, do I think they're a playing team? I guess. Looking at the top 10, maybe the Hawks falter. Of course, the Bulls without Josh Giddey for a few weeks, but the Bulls just seemed like they're indoctrined into the play-in tournament. So, wouldn't surprise me if they stayed in there. But again, a team with the Greek Freak, as long as he stays healthy, I can't see them completely missing out in the top 10. But yeah, just like the last couple of years, first round and bust. And, I know you're a Celtics fan. You were super young when Doc won the title with them. But yeah, I just don't think he's the right fit either. It's crazy how he's moving up the all-time coaching wins record. I guess there's a slim chance he could even pass Popovich by the time it's all done. But I just haven't really seen him as a great coach in quite some time. And Adrian Griffin was doing his thing. What were the Bucks? The second seed, I think, when he got fired. And since Doc Rivers has been there, it's been a steep decline. And I think a lot of the fan base wants him gone. And I could see it happening after the season. So yeah, I'll give it a 7.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I have the same number. It's a tough situation. What we're seeing with the Bucks. I know they have been saying they're positioning themselves as buyers, like Zach LaVine's a name that's been thrown around, Michael Porter Jr. Maybe they could have the assets to get LaVine. Even still, I don't think he's going to be that cheap to the point where Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis or some combination of that gets the job done. I kind of like the idea in theory, and I think that would certainly move them to the playoff picture, but I mean, this Giannis thing is just kind of a ticking time bomb. He hasn't officially asked out, and honestly, the way Giannis has handled this thing has kind of made me lose some respect for him. It's like, do you want to be traded or not? Just come out and say it, because I think it is pretty obvious that he does want to be traded. He just doesn't want to be like the quote unquote villain to where he asks out. But he's putting them in a worse situation ultimately. So I would prefer him just outright saying, I want to be traded. This isn't working. And the other thing that kind of troubles me with this team is even with Giannis, they barely have a record above 500, 11 and 9. So that's not great. I could definitely see them making the playoffs just because they still have the best player in the conference. I mean, Giannis with some shooting, that could work. They could definitely get into the play-in. I think the Bulls spot, even though, like you said, they're the perennial play-in team, I think that's one that's vulnerable. And then from the play-in, who knows? You get into the playoffs, but you're going to lose in the first round with this roster. And despite the rumors, I just don't buy the fact that they're really going to improve significantly at the deadline. They have surprised us before. Getting Miles Turner was certainly a surprise, but like you said, I don't love the fit. I'm not a huge Miles Turner guy, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think the best interest in the Bucks would be looking to trade Giannis because with the way his contract is positioned, his value isn't going to go up, in my opinion. But at the same time, I totally understand not wanting to trade your franchise player if he hasn't officially asked out. So it's a rough situation. I'm going to go, 7 out of 10. I think we're just sort of delaying the inevitable with this Bucks team, and sooner rather than later, they're probably going to start a new era.
Yeah, and I mean, he won a title for the franchise. They hadn't won since Kareem and the Big O. So, even if he were to ask out, he's not going to be a villain for the franchise. They're still going to love him for eternity, the Milwaukee Bucks fans. So, say, oh, my agent works for me, not the other way around. They call it disrespectful to ask questions about it. It's not the route I would go if I were him. Yeah, again, trying too hard not to be the villain. But again, he's never going to be the villain for that franchise, a team that waited so long to win a title. I'm trying to think in other sports. Milwaukee Brewers, I don't think they've won a title in forever. Well, Green Bay, okay, they've won titles, but yeah, other than the Packers, city that hasn't won a lot. So yeah, he's always going to be beloved. If he wants to be traded, I think fans would understand with the lack of support he has around them at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the Bucks fans that I know are pretty level-headed about this whole Giannis situation, and I agree. I think they'd probably understand if that's what it comes to. And I'm sure they're all sick of the drama, which I totally understand because it's gone on for a while. One team, kind of a nice transition that I could potentially see trading for him that has been a little disappointing this season is the Atlanta Hawks. I personally thought they would be like a top 4 or 5 seed in the East. Currently the 10th seed with a 16-19 record. They have had some injury problems, but they've looked a lot better when Trae Young's actually injured. Which is the funny part. Yeah. So where are you with this sort of Hawks team, and do you think they can rise up and make a playoff push? Do you see them as buyers at the deadline?
I'm going to give it an 8. I do have a lot of concerns with this team. Is Porzingis, is this illness going to linger all season? If it was only yesterday, they'd be a 1 because they had their best game of the year, sans Trae Young. Prior to that, they lost 7 in a row with Trae Young in the lineup, giving up at least a buck 26 every game, which is ridiculous. So, yeah, it is interesting how they've been seemingly better without Trae Young. Shout out to Nickeil Alexander-Walker, really doing his thing. One of the probably favorites for most improved player. I haven't necessarily thought fully on that list, but he has to be up there. I think he has the highest point per game improvement from last season in the entire league. So he's been a great find, but Dyson Daniels has been atrocious from 3-point land this year. Okongwu, he's just an undersized center at this point, and as long as Porzingis is out, that's the role he's going to play. Another game where I saw the Knicks live on the offensive glass and he had 30 plus points that game, but he's just an undersized center. Yeah, Luke Kennard hasn't necessarily been that excellent bench piece. He's always going to be a great 3-point shooter, but he hasn't necessarily played all that well. Risache, a very disappointing sophomore season, especially because he really ended his rookie year strong, where there was actually a case. I mean, it was still obvious that Cassel was going to win Rookie of the Year, but with his end of the season, there was at least, you could make an argument that he should be, right there with Cassel. And he's been a huge disappointment this year. And it's a shame because Jalen Johnson is making that ascension into maybe not superstardom, but stardom. I think I saw something that he became the 7th player, I think, in NBA history to have average a 25-point triple double in a month, 25-point triple double in December. I mean, he's been incredible. But yeah, the bench just hasn't looked that great. Krejci, another solid guy, but on a let's say the Knicks, would he be the 9th or 10th guy even on that team? I'm not sure. Thunder, actually, wasn't he a former Thunder? Didn't he start his career with the Thunder,
Yeah, he did.
Krejci?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. So, we know they didn't give him any burn there. So yeah, just a huge disappointment this year. A lot of people expected the defense to be much better, and I guess it has been when Trae Young's out. But yeah, 8. That might have been the highest I've given out of all the 8 teams, I believe. Just I again, as long as Trae Young's on the team and healthy, I just see 2021 as a complete fluke. I mean, they beat the Knicks when it was really Julius Randle and no one else, and we know Randle was terrible at series. Derrick Rose, shout out to him, did his thing on offense, but come on. And then the Sixers, yeah, we know Ben Simmons. That was pretty much his demise that series. So, and since then they've been a playing team, I believe, every year since. So yeah, you expected there to be improvement, but with Porzingis and the illness, yeah, I just don't. I don't see this team as finishing top 4 or 5 in the East. And will they make a move at the deadline? Of course, their most notable player is rumored to be dealt, but I don't think that would. They'll find a way to improve the roster enough to really be a contender even in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good assessment. I mean, listen, this team is never going to have the season that most people envisioned with them being the top 4 or 5 seed. I was certainly high on them. So I think that's a pretty clear downside. And it looks like this Trae Young era is just about over. Whether he gets traded at the deadline or in the offseason remains to be seen. I still think there's some bright spots. Jalen Johnson has looked like a clear like top 20 level player, and they can sort of build around him, which I think is overall a good spot. It's obviously disappointing that they're probably going to be to some degree a playing team. We mentioned it on the Mavericks side, but the Anthony Davis Hawks buzz does look very much real. I don't hate the idea, but I far from love the idea of him being Atlanta Hawk. I think for the price, yeah, why not? I guess it sort of gives you like one last ditch effort to see if you can build a competent defense around Trey. And that combination makes a lot of sense. And like I said, for the price, Porzingis, Kennard, and Risache, okay. At the same time, I would just almost kind of look to go younger, especially when you have this unprotected Pelicans pick coming in that looks like it's going to be potentially a top five pick. And I think that's the other real saving grace of this team. But I would just sort of look to go a little bit younger, build around Jalen Johnson. But that's easier said than done, and the Hawks have been pretty mediocre for so long. I understand like the want to buy. Another name I might even look into a little bit, and this would maybe have to involve Trey, but like Demonis Sabonis on the Kins, I think would be another possible option. But yeah, they're going to be one of the most interesting teams to watch at the deadline, Trey and beyond. I can see a path where they still make the playoffs, just probably as that like 7 seed or something. And I think in the big picture, they're positioned well in large part due to their savior Joe Dumars traded that unprotected first round pick, and I think with whoever that turns out to be and Jalen Johnson, they'll have a bright future. Whether they sort of position themselves to win now at the deadline or maybe go a bit younger.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Davis, if he were to be able to stay healthy, definitely raises the ceiling for sure. And, Hawks definitely need more defensive pieces, so that would help them there. But, it's just hard to count on him for doing that. And again, I don't think Anthony Davis is enough to really put them in the top tier of Eastern Conference teams.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a very valid assessment. I think we can get into our audience questions because the first one comes from our guy Ryan Druin. He asked landed spots for Trae Young. I feel like that's just a super smooth transition. Kind of a difficult exercise, but is there one or two teams that sort of stick out to you?
Trae Young is one of these point guards that it's just hard to see an ideal landing spot. Of course, we heard the report that LaMelo Ball wanted out, which he refuted. I really haven't heard much noise surrounding that. But if he were to want to be dealt, where would his landing spot be? John Morant, who played really well the other night. Was it last night, 2 nights ago, whatever. Um, the same with him. These guys, I just don't see any of the three of them elevating a team to title contender. So, I would have to say a team that is a tier below title contender might be a team to, at least see him slightly raise their ceiling. And honestly, the first team and one of very few teams that come to my mind regarding Trae Young would be the Miami Heat. Maybe that Heat culture can help him become a better player. Would they give up Tyler Hero for him? I'm not sure. But I know a lot of Heat fans have soured on Tyler Hero, who just hasn't been able to stay healthy for them. He definitely would up the ceiling of the offense over a guy like Davion Mitchell, who's currently starting for the Heat. Of course, Mitchell is the better defender. And the Heat have been a up-tempo team this year, and Young would probably help them more in that regard than a Mitchell can. So that's really the number one team that I could think of. I'm looking around the league right now to see another team that could potentially go after him. Again, we write for the Timberwolves. I don't think the Timberwolves are going to go after him. That's two ball dominant players in Trae Young and Anthony Edwards. I don't know how well that would work out. Yeah, I don't necessarily see too many other fits. The Suns, no, they just tried to get out of the salary cap nonsense they were in. And, keep in mind, Trae Young could be a free agent after the season. He has a player option after the year. So he could be a 1-year rental. So is he really do you want to add him knowing that he might leave for nothing after the year? Yeah, I still think he would get a fairly substantial deal in free agency. I don't think the Hawks are wrong not wanting to give him the max. I think that's the correct decision, but I still think he'd get a fairly large deal in free agency. So if I were to guess, I think he would decline that player option. So yeah, my team, and again, can't really think of many others, would be the Miami Heat. I mean, you can't even really say the Pacers because they'll be getting Halliburton back. Maybe the Kings would think of doing a move like that because that's the type of move the Kings would make, but I think they're way too far out of it for even them to consider that. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the Miami Heat.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good one. Honestly, I think that's the best case scenario for the Hawks if they can sort of pull off a hero Trae Young swap. I think that'd be super interesting. And frankly, it's the best case scenario for Trae because he's going to a team that has solid defense around him, especially with Bam Adebayo and Khalil Ware. And he's going to a culture that I think could really get his career back on track. And honestly, out of all the guards, I mean, especially like the three biggest names, him, John Morant, and LaMelo Ball. Yun's the guy that I feel the most comfortable about going to a new spot and sort of, getting his career back on track and returning to all-star form and sort of living up to his hype a little bit. The 2021 run was definitely a bit of a fluke. I just think that matters a bit to me, considering specifically comparing him to like a guy like LaMelo or Ja, where we just haven't seen that totally. And I think his sort of lesser play this season is a little bit more of a one-off thing than a Ja or LaMelo, who have also just struggled with injuries. So he's the guy that I think might have the biggest market actually. But his free agency definitely does complicate things. So I think whoever's trading for him is probably going to have like a hush hush extension lined up with him. And I could see the Heat being in that mix. I think that makes a lot of sense. Two like really bad teams that maybe it would be more of a free agency or offseason thing. For some like the Nets or Wizards, I think they might just sort of want to get out of the bottom. And hey, this guy, he raises your floor at the very least. So those are teams I would keep an eye on, but I don't expect them as trade deadline suitors by any means. You mentioned the other two teams I was going to talk about. The Kings and Suns, I think, are two other suitors I could see. I sort of hinted at it earlier. Maybe a Sabonis Trae swap, something centered around that could be interesting. The Kings just desperately need talent, although it does seem like they might want to go into like a full rebuild, so maybe this doesn't fit. But at the same time, they desperately need a point guard, and they have been known to talent hunt. And then the Suns, we haven't seen it a lot. I think we've only seen like 1.5 games of it, and it did look decent for those 1.5 games. But I was never a big fan of the Jalen Green and Devin Booker fit. So I feel like if you're able to upgrade that Jalen Green spot and get Trae Young next to Booker with an all-around kind of solid defense sneakily, I think that could be a really interesting landing spot. I think Young and Booker just makes a lot of sense, and similar to the Kings, this is a team that's been known to chase talent, and I could see that being the case again. You mentioned the Timberwolves. I think the biggest thing is just like contractually, it's really hard to make it work because I think Young makes 45 million. Again, he'd be the guy I'd be most open towards, and including like Ja and LaMelo, but at the same time, the number's just too big, and I wouldn't trade like Randall, DiVincenzo, and then probably like Dillingham or Conley. I think that's kind of a lot to give up. At this point, I think Randall's probably better than Trae. So then doing that with cutting into the depth is a little bit tricky for me. But at the same time, I don't totally hate that fit.
Yeah, man, but with a Timberwolves team that already struggles with their depth, to make a 3-for-1 trade to me just doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. Yeah. No, totally. I think that's where the real problem comes in. For sure. I think we can move into the next question, and this comes from our guy Hazen Pierce. He wants to know: is Hugo Gonzalez going to make an All Rookie team? Hugo.
That is a tough one. I he's been wonderful for the Celtics. I think the problem is that at least as of now, his counting stats aren't going to be enough for him to do so. Now he is playing more recently, so maybe they up a bit. I know Sam Vecini of the Athletic, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, he did his rookie rankings, and he had Gonzalez 14th, which if there were three all rookie teams, sure, but there's only two. So yeah, if he could continue upping his numbers, maybe they trade Anthony Simons, which would allot him more playing time. The possibilities there. I mean, he's at least put his name into the equation, but again, I just think the counting stats aren't enough. And, I think that's what they look for sometimes in all rookie. It's more opportunity. So I think a guy like Jeremiah Fears, if you say a minute by minute basis, has Fears been better than Gonzalez? I don't know. But he's going to have much better counting numbers. So I would expect him to, as of now, to be on a team over Gonzalez. Of course, I believe it's positionless, right? Like all NBA.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, 10 rookies, off the top of my head, Cowart would make it over him. Trey Johnson, probably he's been playing much better of late. Who else do we got? We got Richard's a close one for the Warriors.
Similar.
Igor with the Nets, maybe. Kalkbrenner's hurt for the Hornets, but he's been more productive. VJ Edgecombe, of course, Cooper Flag, a Concanipple. So yeah, I just think there's been 10 guys that are putting up better numbers. And I think that's largely what they look at for all rookie, even rookie of the year. Michael Carter Williams is rookie of the year because he was putting up numbers on a 76ers team that won, 20 games that year. So, yeah, I mean, again, trade Simons, free up more playing time for him. Sure, the opportunity's there, but I just think there's, as it stands, he's not going to make it. But at least he's put his name into the equation. And again, if there was an all rookie third team, he'd probably be on that.
Yeah, no, even as a Celtics fan, I gotta agree with that. Hayes' question definitely did make me think a little. I wrote out a list and I was like, yeah, I can't get there, unfortunately. I think the top 10 has just been like, it's kind of untenable. Maybe one of these guys falls out, but yeah, you hit on most of them. The only other guys I didn't think I heard you mention was Derek Queen, Dylan Harper, and then
Yes.
Maxime
Oh,
Renault. So add in those three with the seven that you named, I feel like it is a bit untenable for him to get there unless something changes. With that being said, he's been awesome for them. He's a high impact guy, brings that intensity, brings that defense, and once Tatum returns, I think he's going to be really a perfect fit. And if like you said, if there was an all rookie third team, I think he'd probably make it. I think he'll get some votes, especially from guys like Bill Simmons. But yeah, at this point, I don't see it. And yeah, I think you nailed it. Like the counting stats are just really valued in all rookie, and I guess that's valid in terms of like impact on winning. Yeah, he's probably been one of the more impactful rookies on winning, but at the same time, most of these rookies are going to situations where their teams aren't trying to win. So I think that's the big thing to note there. But yeah, Ugo's been great, and I know Hayes has been a massive Ugo guy. I believe he said he's his new favorite Celtics player until Tatum gets back.
yeah, and I forgot Maxime. Shout out to him. He's been winning me some money on FanDuel since he entered the starting lineup. So, and he's a big shot because he was a second round pick.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, at least one positive from the Kings season this year. So shout out to him.
absolutely. Yeah, would have been nice in the Timberwolves.
Did they take Rocco before him?
Nah, but they traded down for Rocco.
Correct. Yes.
Question we got is from our guy Bruce Velez. He wants to know: do you think they should lower the 65 game limit for All NBA and awards?
Man, has this been a debate? Even more so with the Jokic injury. If he keeps him out the 4 weeks that has been reported, that's 16 games. That would mean he could only miss two more. Well, sorry, one more to reach that 65 game minimum. I'm of the belief that the major awards, I don't have a problem with it. So MVP, Defensive Player of the Year. Other than that, I don't even know if I would have the minimum for any of the other. Rookie of the Year, I don't necessarily think you need that 65 game minimum, but really for all NBA and all defensive, I don't think that 65 game minimum should be the rule. But for MVP, I think it is important for a guy to be mostly in the lineup. I know I mentioned to you, so that's what about little more than 3/4 of the season. So again, if an NFL player missed 4 games, almost the same percentage, yeah, they'd have zero chance at winning MVP. If the MLB player missed 40 plus games, they would have no chance at MVP. So yeah, I love the Joker. He's probably my favorite guy to watch, not on the Knicks, and I'm sure a lot of people have the same sentiment, but I can't say that, especially if SGA keeps this up. Um, if Joker misses that many games, he should be in the running for MVP. And even if he does reach the 65 game minimum, let's say he only misses 16 games, somehow plays the rest of the season, 66 games compared to, I don't know, let's say 77 for SGA. To me, that gives him a distinct advantage over the Joker. Rookie of the year, maybe I I could see a guy playing 55, 60 games. I'm of the belief that Embiid shouldn't have won it that year. What did he play? 30,
31.
31. I know Malcolm Brogdon was kind of a weak rookie of the year winner, but yeah, 31 is a little bit too low to win an award. But yeah, I think for MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, I don't have a problem with that 65 game minimum. Six Man of the Year. For me, I don't like how the rule is. At least half your games got to be coming off the bench. So a guy could start 40 of 82 games and be in the running. We see a guy like Nas Reed. He hasn't started a game. Anthony Black has better odds than him to win. He's started, I don't know, 12 or 13. He's been starting a bunch of late. And most improved, maybe 65 game limit for that one. But I think the two that you really want to see a guy play quite a bit is MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. So I do think the contract thing is rough because we saw Tyrese Halliburton trying to ensure that he reached it. And we know what happened there with him getting injured. So, yeah, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I'm not pretty much the majority now who want to see it done away with. But maybe you can do away with it. But again, maybe be a voter like how I would vote it. Again, in a guy who plays more should just have a distinct advantage.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in essence, I think it's a good rule. I think availability is super important. But yeah, like you said, I think these voters are always going to kind of factor that in anyway. So I don't know how much of a difference it makes in reality. But in essence, I think it's a good rule. We've seen an uptick in guys playing and sitting out a bit less since it was introduced. So I think that's really beneficial. Yeah, I don't know. I might lower it to like 60 games, but I think they should still keep some sort of limit. 5 games might not make that much of a difference. But yeah, I mean, the real problem I would have, and you brought it up, was like the contract stuff. I think there's just got to be a better way to figure out contracts. You got to have something. Maybe they do some sort of metric, but I think it's tough for guys that, I mean, like Halliburton's the perfect example. He's trying to earn that super max, and he's sort of forcing himself to play through some of these injuries, and that's pretty tough because he had that like breakout season 2 years ago when he was really battling through those injuries, trying to get to that 65 game mark. And I feel like if it's clear that you had a breakout season in 58 games or whatever, I think you should still be eligible for that contract. I get why they sort of have it because you don't want to give a supermax contract to a guy that is constantly injured. But if it's kind of like a one-off thing or more of a rare thing, I don't think it really should weigh as heavily. But overall, I think it's a good rule. I think the results are clear that players have been playing more regular season games because of it, and I think that's a big benefit. So again, I go back and forth, especially with the contract stuff, but ultimately I do think it is a good rule. All right. We're going to switch it up to a football question we got from our guy Justin Lurie. He asks, where does Lamar Jackson play football week 1 next year? I'll let you take this one, obviously, especially because of my bias, but let's see what you think.
Baltimore Ravens, week 1. I fully expect the Ravens to beat the Steelers to win the AFC North. Definitely a subpar year for the Ravens. Definitely a subpar year for Lamar Jackson, who, of course, has missed more than his fair share of time this year with injuries. We've seen Tyler Huntley play some admirable football. Shout out to Derrick Henry, who's been completely dominant. They probably would have beaten the Patriots if they didn't just stop giving him the ball. He wasn't even in the last couple possessions against New England, which made no sense. But yeah, I fully expect Baltimore to win, and not having DK Metcalf is huge for Pittsburgh. We saw, Rodgers trying to force the ball to Marquez Valdez-Scantling against the Browns. So I think the Ravens do make the playoffs. We'll see who they play. I think Buffalo would be a very tough matchup. I think who else could they play? The Chargers. I could definitely see them beating the Chargers and then either Texans or Jaguars. Yeah, I mean, I would probably pick the Ravens to beat any of those teams except the Bills. I know the Texans got a scary defense. I know Trevor Lawrence is playing incredible of late, but the Chargers with their offensive line problems, I think Baltimore would be able to wreak havoc on Justin Herbert. But yeah, there might be a little bit of a disconnect this year with Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh. Uh, but yeah, he's still a two-time MVP. Some would argue he should be a three-time MVP. You can't let one down season make you want to trade him. Your ceiling's obviously much higher with him than it is with Tyler Huntley, and maybe they would. I'm sure they want to, if they were to get rid of Lamar Jackson. I don't think they would go into next season with Tyler Huntley as their starting quarterback. But no, you can't just give up Lamar Jackson at the age of 27, 28, whatever he is right now. Because he's clearly top handful of players when he's at his peak. And I mean, the playoff performances at times have been a tad disappointing. I don't think you could blame him too much for the Bills game last year. Mark Andrews, that drop, that was huge. But yeah, if Baltimore, I think they'll rebound nicely next season. And he's a huge part of the reason why. Just get him healthy. And yeah, I don't think you could get rid of Lamar Jackson. And he's what, 20? No, he's 20. Oh, he's actually turns 29 in 6 days. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So,
no, he's a Raven in week 1 next season.
all right, yeah, no, I'm glad you agree. Yeah, I don't see him getting traded. I wouldn't say there's a 0% chance. But I'd be pretty surprised if they do trade him. Yeah, like you said, you can't let one bad year sort of get in the way. And ultimately, you don't trade a franchise quarterback who's won multiple MVPs. I can't really think of too many examples of that working out, quite frankly. And I mean, I still think Lamar's. I mean, I know he had a down year, but he's still like clearly a top 5 quarterback to me, just based off what he's done the last few years. I mean, you look at last year, he probably should have won MVP in my opinion. I would like to see the Ravens make some changes. Interestingly, I think you're a little bit higher in their ceiling than me. I think, yeah, they'll probably get into the playoffs, but they're probably going to lose. Bills, Texans. I agree they could maybe beat the Chargers. Little fun hardball game there, but ultimately this ceiling's pretty limited, and I think really the problems have a lot more to do with Harbaugh than Jackson, and I would look to move on from Harbaugh. I don't doubt that there's some disconnect there. Um, at the same time, I would just part ways with Harbaugh. You mentioned the lack of usage for Derrick Henry. That's been a consistent problem, and consistently in the playoffs, I put the blame on Harbaugh more than Jackson. When you look at coaches who have blown the most double-digit leads, it's John Harbaugh by a significant distance. So I think it's sort of time to move on from him unless you have some sort of like magical playoff run. And I think that's the most likely scenario that they do move on from Harbaugh. There's some like buzz around Lamar potentially getting traded, but the reality is it's not very credible. This guy, Mike Preston, that was the big report that came out. He has an annual hit piece on Lamar. He said they should have traded Ray Lewis like 20 years ago. So that guy's kind of a clown, quite frankly. So I don't put any weight into that. And then the other guy was Mike Sando of The Athletic, who is more reliable, but it's
Shout
from
out
an
to Pick
anonymous
Six.
agent.
Pick
Yeah.
Six is one of the best articles every week. But yeah,
He is a great writer, and I don't doubt his reporting from an agent that says this Lamar thing will be worth watching. But I don't think that means that he's necessarily getting traded, quite frankly. And I think Lamar's smart enough to realize that if he does request a trade, that the grass is not always greener on the other side. I know, like Miami's been thrown around or
yes,
Minnesota, but there's just as good of a chance that he goes to Las Vegas, which would be a horrible situation, or New
the
York with the
AT.
Jets specifically. Yeah, so it's just I don't think Lamar would want to potentially risk it to go to a worse situation. And even like Miami, I don't know if that's a better situation or Minnesota. So yeah, ultimately, I think it's in the best interest of both parties to stay together. And I think that's the most likely outcome.
Yeah, I mean, there's people saying that it could be the loser of the game, Tomlin or Harbaugh, might not be back next year. I mean, I think again, sometimes a guy does run their course, and Harbaugh's been there how long, and the Super Bowl was how many years ago. So I could see it happening even if they were to win and lose in the opening round. As a Giants fan, I think the Giants would be on the phone with his agent within, I don't know, 2 minutes of his announcement of being fired if that were the case. But yeah, sometimes you just need a new voice in the room. That's what a lot of Steelers fans believe with Mike Tomlin as well, another guy who the Giants would definitely talk to if he were available. But I mean, yeah, we see it in all sports, even the Spurs. Greg Popovich was there forever. Right now they might be better with Mitch Johnson at this point, and that's not to discredit everything Popovich has done in his career. And John Harbaugh would still be a legendary Ravens coach, guiding him to a Super Bowl win. But yeah, again, it's been 2012 was the year they won the Super Bowl, so almost approaching a decade and a half since that happened. We've seen, I mean, the Eagles fired Doug Peterson, 2 or 3 years after they won the Super Bowl, and they won another one. Doug Peterson didn't last in Jacksonville. So, yeah, I can see them deciding that now is the time to look for a new head coach. I'm not sure who that guy would be. I think like a Marcus Freeman would have been an excellent guy, but we know that he'll at least be back at Notre Dame next season. So, yeah, definitely going to be an interesting offseason with head coaches, Atlanta, Raheem Morris. Even with them playing better, I think he's gone. Mike McDaniel, maybe they've improved enough where he stays. But yeah, always fun. Not fun. You don't want to see guys lose their job, but the coaching carousel is always interesting every offseason.
These teams have consistently underwhelmed. The Steelers haven't won a playoff game in damn near a decade at this point. So, yeah, I think honestly it would be best, regardless of what happens on Sunday, for both organizations to move on from their coach. And that is sort of the joke that the loser gets the Giants job, which I could definitely see. And honestly, for the Giants, like, I have my issues with Harbaugh. I'm sure Steelers fans have their issue with Tomlin, but like I said, they're guys that can build a culture and floor raisers.
Yeah, I mean, they're both substantially better than anyone the Giants have had since Tom Coughlin. So yeah, I'd be all for either of them.
All right, next question comes from Roundball Renaissance, and he wants to know who will have the best 2026. So I guess a player and team who will have the best year ahead of us.
Okay, interesting question for sure, man. So I'm a Knicks fan, so I'm gonna leave them out of this. I would love to say Knicks and Jalen Brunson. I'm gonna leave them out of this, though. This man. I would say, and I don't want to give the obvious answers of Thunder and SGA. So I'm gonna probably go a little bit surprising, especially since the guy's currently hurt. But I think Jokic is gonna come back and not miss a beat whatsoever. By the time he's back, as long as none of these other guys get hurt, Christian Brown, Aaron Gordon, and Cam Johnson should all be back for them. And yeah, I just think if they could keep those five together, I think they'll be the biggest threat to OKC for sure. When I first saw the Joker injury, I thought maybe season ender. So 4 weeks is definitely was awesome news for the team. And yeah, I think the Nuggets, as long as they stay healthy, I don't think playoff seeding's a huge factor for them. Where I it would be nice to finish top four for sure. I think the Rockets are the lowest seed ever to win the finals. 5. They're when they acquired Drexler. I could be wrong. I think they're the
That
lowest
sounds
seed.
right.
I think they're the lowest seed ever to win a championship. But
Don't ever underestimate the heart of a champion.
exactly. And yeah, so I think the Nuggets could make the finals as a 6 seed. That's not a worry to me as long as they get into the playoffs healthy. Thunder, we just heard how they dominated without their full starting lineup. Well, they got their full starting lineup back for some games and they started losing. So yeah, I think the Nuggets, they're still my pick to make the NBA finals. I don't want to say I'm picking them to win it all because I'm not picking the Knicks either, but I just don't want to pick a team other than the Knicks. I'm not picking the Knicks, but I'm not picking really anyone. But yeah, I think the Nuggets and the Joker, once he's back, so, we'll see if he could come back by February 1st. That still gives him more than 2 months of the regular season to do his thing and then, the playoffs. So yeah, I'm going to go with the Nuggets and the Joker. And, once the next season begins, the rest of 2026, they should have all those. Their starting five should remain with the team. I think Cam Johnson has looked. I know he's hurt now, but he was starting to look a little more comfortable. on the offensive end. Jamal Murray could finally be making his first All-Star team after all these years. So, yeah, give me the Nuggets. Give me the Joker.
Yeah, no, I really like that answer. That was my pick in the preseason, Nuggets over Knicks. And even with the Jokic injury, I don't know, I just kind of like sticking to my prediction, so I might have to stick to that for the sake of giving a different answer, and like you said, not just default into SGA and the Thunder, which is probably realistically the most likely answer, just based off how good they are, even though they have kind of struggled recently. I feel like that's the most likely answer. I'll go with the Spurs and Wemby. I know Wemby did kind of go down with that like little knee injury. I think he'll be okay though. I think this is just kind of the year of the Spurs. We're already sort of starting to see it. I don't think many people expected them to be a 2 seed. I thought I was high on them, saying that they would avoid the play-in the beginning of the or before the regular season, and it turns out I was way too low on them. And I could totally just see them having a crazy run where they go to the conference finals. I don't think they're going to win at all by any means, so maybe by default that doesn't make my prediction make a whole lot of sense. Saying someone else, I'll go with the Spurs and Wemby, and then going into 2026, the first half of next season, I think the Spurs could really, really challenge the Thunder for that number 1 seed. And I think we could see an MVP year from Wemby. I mean, it's really just a matter of him staying healthy, but I could see Wemby having that like MVP level season. So yeah, I'll go with the Spurs and Wemby, and I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably be my second answer, both Spurs and Wemby. Rockets are playing better too. We'll see if they can make a move at that trade deadline. I don't even know where they need a clear upgrade, to be honest. You could say their point guard play, but they honestly haven't missed Fred VanVleet that much this season. They've gotten that sophomore jump from Reed Shepherd that the Timberwolves haven't gotten from Rob Dillingham. So yeah, I think both of us came up with pretty good answers for not wanting to name the Thunder or SGA.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the Rockets are a fun one. That'd be cool. I'd love to see it for KD. I'm a big KD guy. So seeing him sort of maybe going on a championship run on his own team, and he hasn't had much success post Warriors. But yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be a fun one for sure. But yeah, I think we can wrap it up here before we officially close out the episode. I just want to give you a chance to plug your work to the listeners. Tell them where they can find you at.
Sure, you can find me at Teacher Talking Sports on YouTube. Talk about mostly NBA, NFL, little MLB, NHL, occasionally NASCAR, college football as well. I see Oregon was up 6-0 when I last looked, so doesn't look like we missed much doing this. We'll catch the second half, right, both of us write for Duncan with Wolves, Minnesota Timberwolves. You can find us on at DuncanWolves.com. We had a lot of articles today after that majorly disappointing game against the Hawks. And, I know we didn't talk about the Timberwolves, but really quick, there has to be more than, I've heard people saying that Anthony Edwards was upset that the starters were taken out, and that's why he threw his towel and left. I mean, every NBA player's got to realize the starters are coming out when you're down 29 with less than 8 minutes left. So I think it's more than just him being upset that the starters were taken out. We'll see more quotes regarding that. Yeah, check us out, Duncan with Wolves, both of us. We're coming out with daily articles on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you hopping on the show, Kenny. All the listeners, make sure to go check out his work. And yeah, Duncan with Wolves will definitely be super active. I mean, we always are, but especially leading up to this trade deadline, we're going to have a lot of content going up.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a fun team to read about. They've definitely gone through their ebbs and flows this year, blown a couple huge leads at the end. But yeah, definitely a fun team to cover.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, if it couldn't be the Celtics, I really couldn't think of a better team to cover, especially this season. It's been kind of crazy, honestly. All right. Yeah, we can wrap it up. Catch you guys in the next episode. Once again, appreciate you hopping on the show. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Cassels Cast. Once again, shout out to Kenny for hopping on. Make sure to go check out all of his work. And shout out to you guys for all the questions. I really appreciate it. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Peace.